Hello, and welcome to today's conversation, Securing the Enterprise. I'm Bennett Richardson, President of Protocol. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to our partners at Bay for making today's event possible. At Protocol, we aim to arm you as decision makers in tech, business, and policy with actionable news and analysis to help you do your job. In today's global landscape, cybersecurity threats are something that every business operating on the internet must face, not just enormous tech companies. In today's event, we'll examine the best practices for securing both enterprises and small to medium-sized businesses, aiming to get a sense of the true threat landscape and information leaders can use to make decisions about the strategy that best supports their business goals. We're so glad you could tune in today. If you're not already subscribed, don't forget to sign up for Protocol Enterprise and Protocol's entire family of newsletters at protocol.com/newsletters. To kick things off, I'm excited to welcome Rotem Iram for an executive conversation on cybersecurity in the digital economy and the evolving expectations on the accountability of enterprise tech platforms and the government leaders that regulate them. Rotem is the co-founder and CEO of the cyber insurance provider at Bay. For the last 20 years, he has worked to make the internet a safer place, previously serving as managing director and chief operating officer in the cybersecurity practice of K2 Intelligence, a leading global risk management firm on cyber intelligence, defense strategy, and incident response. He also served as a consultant with McKinsey & Company and began his career as a captain in Israel's intelligence unit 8200. Welcome, Rotem. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Would love your help setting the stage for our conversation today. What do you see as the biggest misconception about cybersecurity among business leaders?
That's a great question. So Bay is an insurance company, and therefore we study what happens to portfolios of companies and not necessarily individual companies. We care about what drives or correlates with higher frequency of attacks and what correlates or drives higher damages, financial damages from attacks. And the biggest misconception I see is a belief that cyber is complicated, where in fact it's mostly complex. What I mean is that we focus on securing enterprises against complex, advanced, or complicated, advanced persistent threats, because we already know how to stop the simple attacks. But the fact that we know how to stop them doesn't mean that in practice we actually do. What actually happens in our portfolio and in other insurance portfolios that we see is that most companies get attacked by simple issues, issues that are, we would call them mundane. It is actually the complexity of trying to defend the organization from the operational side of security that is causing more companies to get attacked than the actual sophistication of the attacks themselves.
Got it. That's a great point, and obviously, software vulnerability is one of those somewhat straightforward areas that contribute to a significant amount of cyber breaches. And as you and I were talking about last week, in some cases, a certain handful of software vulnerabilities contributing to a number of those breaches. But with that context, it seems as though we're quick to blame the victim for letting it happen in the first place, to blame that customer or that company. Is this fair? How do you think the wider business and technology ecosystem should react to today's big breaches and when you see a big cyber hack in the news?
Yeah, I think it's tempting to blame the victim because sometimes the attacks seem so simple to stop. Right? Why did you click on that link? But I actually think it's really not fair. It's not fair. I'll use an example. Imagine you're a small business owner and you need a car to drive to work. So you buy a car and then you use it every day. One day you walk in and the brakes fail. You survive a crash only to learn that the vendor of the brakes posted on their blog site that there's a critical vulnerability in the brakes. You should have learned about it yourself. You should have downloaded the patch and fixed it yourself. Now imagine they're not going to recall the car. They're not going to let you know about it. They're not going to fix it, and they're definitely not going to be accountable for any of the damages that you experience. Now imagine you have 50, not to mention 500 different vendors of parts in your car. Each one is going to break 3 times a year. All you wanted was a car. Now you need to employ a full-time mechanic, reading blogs, patching, downloading, configuring a car that is really incredibly difficult to just kind of do its job. And that is very much what it feels like when you are a small or medium-sized business owner, where you just do not have the resources or the capacity to deal with with how fragile your technology stack actually is. And while with cars, we would find it unacceptable that a vendor wouldn't take any responsibility, we don't apply similar requirements on the enterprise software vendors who, at the end of the day, push great new technology that is, from a functional perspective, is incredible, but it also creates meaningful security risks into the organization that in recent years have become in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And I think putting all the emphasis on the owner of the business, on the user, is probably not the right kind of equilibrium. And it's not only that software tends to break often, it is also that software is designed, any vendor of software focuses intently on making its software incredibly easy and fun and good and a good experience, right? But we know that oftentimes security conflicts with ease of use. Nobody wants to go through multi-factor authentication when they log in. It's not convenient in any way, but we know that it is important. But in fact, more than 50% of all ransomware in America, it's a huge number. I still, every time I say it, I struggle to believe it's true, but more than 50% of all ransomware in America comes from a single vulnerability in a single software that has been made with a login that is incredibly easy to break into. Basically, you can try to log in as many times as you want, even 1 million times in a minute. And so attackers can use a very simple attack to break in. The product manager that built that login flow was not evil in any way. The attempt was to make it simple and easy to use. But the downstream implications of that design are hurting numerous amounts of businesses in America. And so we're really just making it incredibly difficult on companies. And I think that it doesn't help that on the other side, we have sophisticated, well-organized criminal organizations, often sponsored by foreign governments and operating from foreign countries. In the physical space, we expect our government to be highly active in stopping crime, especially one that is organized or sponsored by another government. Yet in the cyberspace, typically, unless it is an incredibly highly visible target, government typically doesn't play an important role. And I think the government has two roles that it doesn't play here. One is on the defense side. The other one is on the regulation side. There's again, I talked earlier about multi-factor authentication. If that is indeed a meaningful and important security control, then the government might want to have a position on whether it should be a requirement on software. And I think the government has chosen to stay away from the space for a bunch of different reasons. And again, it is putting all of the pressure on the customer, which I think is a lot and probably just too much to expect.
Absolutely, and especially in a context where the government isn't playing that active role. Clearly, an interesting role that insurance can play is to set those standards and raise that bar. If customers seeking that protection need to obviously comply to the kind of standards of quality that you all are implementing. So clearly, an important role that you all are playing in the ecosystem. As we look ahead, and before we hand things over to our panel, what is your hope for the future? And what can businesses do in the meantime to lower their risk of a cyber attack while they're waiting and seeking better support?
Yeah, it was never my intention or plan to get into insurance. I was a security guy, but I found that insurance had a really important role to play in security. As you mentioned earlier, insurance tends to be the one that sets standards for a bunch of different reasons. We're the ones who pay at the end, so we see what matters. But we also have the insurance policy as an incredibly powerful tool to enforce standards. We've seen multi-factor authentication as an example. We've seen more than twice the amount of companies adopted in 1 year since insurance companies have made it a requirement in their application forms. And I believe that we have a chance to really kind of step in, solve some of the problems that the operational problems that the insurers have, reflect to them the trade-offs that they're making, but also we can bring back accountability into the software vendors, because we quote unquote punish organizations who choose worse software. Functionally, two softwares might look exactly the same, but one might be less secure and drive more risk. We are pushing our customers away from that software. We are creating then a feedback loop back to the vendor to take security more seriously. So I really am hoping that insurance can play a really meaningful role in making all these different dynamics much more visible, allow government to do its job better. Today seatbelts are required by law, but it wasn't always the case. Back in the day, the insurance industry had to sue the government in the Supreme Court to force its hand to make seatbelts a regulation. We could imagine something to the same effect with Mfa or other important controls. So I really am hoping that through the insurance lens, we can understand what drives risks and do a much better job as a society to organize against it. In the meantime, I recommend businesses to prioritize software that comes secure out of the box. The idea that you will give users the capability to choose their own adventure, I think is whether they want high security or low security, and install it out of the box with very low settings so that everything works, and then lean on the user to actually decide how much usability they want to take away for the sake of security. I think that is the wrong paradigm, and I would highly recommend to go with software who put security as kind of a first order of business. We are seeing dramatic differences in between softwares who are otherwise functionally similar, but from a security perspective, just drive dramatic differences in actual frequencies of claims.
Absolutely. Well, starting more secure is certainly a crucial step in securing the enterprise and securing businesses, big and small. Thank you, Rotem, for the insights. Great way to kick things off today, and thank you again to @Bay for the partnership.
Thank you so much.
Now we'll move into our panel. I'm excited to bring up Kyle Alspach, Protocol Senior Reporter and our moderator for today's conversation, to introduce our speakers and get started. Kyle, over to you.
Thanks so much, Bennett, and thanks, Rotem, for all those insights and setting the stage there. Actually, I had a whole intro that I was planning to go through, but I just feel like you just pretty much set the stage for the type of stuff that I'm hoping to ask people about. So I'd love to dive right in, but first, if the panelists could just introduce themselves, maybe starting with Jameeka.
Hi, thanks so much, Kyle. It's nice to see you again. My name is Jameeka Green-Aaron, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Auth0, which is switching over to the Customer Identity Cloud by Okta.
And whoever wants to go next can just go through an intro.
All right, I guess I'll go. Hi, my name's Dev. I lead security here at Figma, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks for the great intro, Rotem and Bennett. And I guess I'll pop on over to Andrew.
Thanks, Dev. Hi, I'm Andrew Rubin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Illumio. And Kyle, it's great to reconnect. And thanks so much for having me today.
All right, I'm Alex Weinert. I'm the VP of Identity Security at Microsoft.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. And just looking forward to this conversation. So I would just love to jump right in with multi-factor authentication and MFA, since Rotem and Bennett were just talking about that. I think it's a great point. About the expectation on customers is very high, but as part of that, I mean, it's getting harder because certain types of MFA are just not as effective as they used to be. Attackers are finding ways around them. And so I would just love to hear, maybe somebody could jump in with, distinguishing for us between just regular MFA. I mean, any kind of MFA is better than nothing, but just, traditional MFA versus, a stronger form of that. And whoever wants to start there and take that would be great.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll dive in because I love talking about MFA. But I think, yes, they're not all MFA is created equally. And I think what we're thinking about is, and what the previous conversation was about, I think, is making our users our first line of defense versus categorizing them as our weakest link. And in order to do that, we have to make sure that security reduces friction within the MFA process. Otherwise, MFA fatigue is a new buzzword that's going around, but it's a real word. It's a real thing. And I think that what we're seeing is users getting MFA fatigue. There are some marked differences in MFA, and we really should be looking towards deprecating SMS as one of those threads to pull on MFA. It's the weakest link on MFA and very prone to smishing, and we see a lot of attacks that are very effective using that. But when you also build on top of like WebAuthn and FIDO and implement biometrics into the MFA process and add some other technologies, I think you definitely see higher adoption by the users, ease of use for the users, and ultimately it allows them to become that first line of defense. I think behind the scenes, when we think about all of the vendors that do MFA, there's a lot of work that's happening. I think that really is going to make MFA a lot better, from threat intelligence sharing to adaptive and step up MFA that happen in the background using analytics and machine learning to really help us do the work behind the scenes to create those different ways in which our users can use MFA. And it's flawless for them on the front end. We're doing the work on the back end.
Alex, would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, I think everything Jameeka said was spot on. Like, I don't have a lot of contention with that at all. I think the numbers are interesting, right? Like in our ecosystem, we're doing, we'd see about 2.5 million compromised accounts a month total across the whole ecosystem. It's a big ecosystem, so it's a small percentage of a big number. But that's just things that could be prevented with any kind of MFA, like anything at all, right, would stop those attacks. And so I think it's interesting to think of this as like a pyramid, where like the base of the pyramid is, just the world out there. Passwords are not enough. Passwords are not secure. Like if you think you can do something with expiry rules and complexity rules and whatever, you're wrong. So you have to do some kind of MFA. Once you do that, you eliminate. And by the way, we're talking like 110 million blocked attacks a day, and then 2.5 million that gets through a month, and that's all like MFA preventable. That's passwords only stuff. Once you get past that, then you get into things that are more interesting along like Mfa fatigue and adversary in the middle phishing. And those things are, I think Jameeka put her finger right on it, which was, look, you implement WebAuthn on your website and, take advantage of the FIDO infrastructure or the passkey infrastructure and get people off of passwords altogether. Much better user experience. Absolutely secure against fatigue attacks and adversary in the middle attacks and most social attacks. So, it's a really, really good way to go.
Great. Thank you. Well, Devdatta, I would love to hear from you, since, you're on the front line with securing your enterprise or, getting to be an enterprise. I would love to hear, what kind of issues you're seeing with this, how you've been tackling this whole, initial identity authentication issue.
Yeah, thanks. I think first I'll sort of say, being in security, I am an eternal optimist, so maybe, but I think, I sort of flip the script to what you said around like, MFA fatigue and exhaustion. I personally am super excited about WebAuthn and how much easier it is. I use Face ID, Touch ID as my web authenticators, and it's just, so nice not to have pull something up, find a number, type the number, or anything like that. Logging in is looking at my phone and the Face ID kicks in. And so we have rolled it out at Figma, where all login to our ID provider is only through WebAuthn. And WebAuthn, as both Jameeka and Alex mentioned, is phish proof, the only technology that is phish proof. And it's been exciting. I think every year I see the usability of these new technologies get better and better. And it remains at its core a rock solid secure technology based on modern cryptography. And so our experience has been good. I would say 3 years ago, it was maybe more iffy, but every year it has gotten easier and easier. And it's something like, it's the first thing I recommend anyone to roll out if they want to have a modern, strong security posture, is enforce WebAuthn only in their ID provider. I can get into the tech details of why it's way more secure, but yeah.
Just for anyone who doesn't know, maybe you could just quickly define what WebAuthn is.
WebAuthn is a new technology to do MFA. I think the easiest way I found to explain it, and hopefully this explanation makes sense, is when you currently MFA, I think many people are used to what is called TOTP or Google Authenticator or something like that, where you have an app on your phone, you're trying to log into a device, you look up that exact website on that app, and then type in the 6-digit code that shows up. The danger in that is you are looking up the app. So as a human, if you are confused or phished, you will look up the wrong app. So you might be on, g0google.com and think it's Google and type in the Google 6-digit code on your app. With WebAuthn, there is no step where you look up the device. The browser tells your MFA device that the user is currently on google.com or some other website. And so there's no way for you to get phished. The browser talks to your MFA device and tells it, oh, this is the website, give me the secondary authenticator and log me in. And so the core difference, as I think of it, is that we have taken away the risk of a human getting confused and making a mistake. And so that's what makes it extremely phish-proof. And then additionally, there's a lot of cryptography and modern tech there, which makes it a lot more secure. It's not 6-digit numbers, it's giant cryptographic keys. So they are very hard to brute force or anything like that. So I'd say those are the two main things I think about with WebAuthn. And then in modern technology, on modern laptops and phones and computers, it is possible to use the Touch ID on your laptop or the Face ID on your phone as an MFA device. And that makes it really clean and usable.
Right. If I could interject just briefly, because I think it is useful to level set on the technology name. So there's the thing called FIDO, right? And FIDO is comprised of two standards. One is WebAuthn, which is what essentially are the calls made to the browser, right? So that's the API you implement in the browser. And the second part is CTAP, which is the underlying operating system implements to do all the cool cryptographic stuff Dev was talking about. And then that usually ties into whatever secure module, like a TPM that's on the laptop or on the phone that you have, and it can take advantage of the biometrics. So like Windows Hello is just doing that under the covers. The new stuff from Passkey from iOS and Android is just doing that under the covers.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that explanation, both of you. Well, I want to also get over to Andrew, and I want to maybe hear obviously there's prevention, and prevention is great, and MFA is a great prevention tool, prevents a lot of the stuff that leads to breaches, but there's also something that happens after the breach, and you don't just have to throw up your hands and let the hackers do whatever they want to do after they're in. You can mitigate the damages. You can make the damage as minimal as possible. And so, Andrew, I would love to hear from you. I mean, how much of the damage that's actually done in a breach typically can you actually mitigate if you're doing the right things, doing the things that are currently available?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously a topical one, given that so many of the incidents that we're all seeing and reading about tend to be catastrophic in nature by the time they make it to our newsfeed. So I think we're entering I'll say a new era for security, but I don't want to make that sound bigger than the statement sounds. I think what's happened is everybody says, what's the biggest change in security right now? And ironically, I don't think it's what any vendor does or even what software a customer is buying. I think the biggest change in security the last couple of years is that all these organizations are now facing the reality that breaches are here to stay. You will or have been hit. It's actually part of the cost of running our technology stack and our lives this way. And so we have to accept that as part of the reality and then build a strategy for security that takes it into account. And that may sound really obvious right now, but that's a massive mindset shift for all of us, the vendors, the customers, the CISOs, to actually get up in the morning and say, I'm going to try and detect and prevent as much as I possibly can, but I know I'm never going to be perfect at it again. Therefore, I also need a strategy for mitigation and resilience. And I do think that is sort of the punchline here. And then in terms of your question, Kyle, how much can you really affect the outcome when a piece of ransomware enters the environment or something makes its way in that doesn't belong there? The truth of the matter is you can do a lot. Now, unfortunately, it requires another mental shift, which is you have to actually decide to be proactive. You have to make changes to the environment in advance of the problem, because by the time the piece of ransomware is there and spreading like wildfire, it's already too late. And that's another shift in security. We're great at being reactive in security. We've been doing it really well for 30 years. Unfortunately, we're really terrible at being proactive. We're bad at hygiene. We're bad at proactively putting controls in to prevent things from spreading. We just like to react to the crisis. And so I think as we're seeing organizations shift their mindset towards resilience, which is probably the number one word that I hear from customers nowadays, I think we're starting to build security controls into the environment that basically are there for a single reason. When something bad happens, prevent it from becoming enormous and catastrophic. And obviously from an Illumio perspective, if I put that hat on, our entire mission is to live in this zero trust segmentation world. That's what we do. It's a fancy term for basically saying chop up your environment, whether it be your data center, your cloud, your endpoint estate, and basically build compartments so that if one compartment becomes infected and sick, that compartment has a problem, but it doesn't spread to the entire rest of the estate in the process. And obviously we're not the only player and we're not the only control trying to help with resilience, but I do think that customers, organizations are now saying, this is now equally important to detect and remediate and respond. And so I think there's some big shifts there. And I think it's great for security because quite frankly, security needs both missions to be successful.
Great.
If I can interject, hallelujah. Like it is so important that we get off of this idea that like, hey, I'm going to tell you how you got breached. When we look at things like current generation breaches of, for example, somebody stealing your signing certificate and compromising your federation relationship, like the only response to that is probably your resignation letter. Like you better get in front of it in terms of, you know, compartmentalization. I love the stuff Andrew's saying. We're huge advocates of zero trust and really think of it as like they're two sides of a coin, right? You've got to be preventative, be all about security posture, get in front of least privilege access, and really knowing, really thinking through your policies, and then also be prepared to respond. And one thing that we're seeing, I think, with the velocity increase, we've seen huge increases in velocity of attacks and complexity of attacks. A nation state attack today turns into a script kiddie attack tomorrow. Yep. It's really important that you're investing in automation. Like you've got to, not just automate the prevention, but also automate your response to the greatest extent possible.
Alex, I completely agree. One of the key tenets, and I think zero trust is new to the world, but it's not new to the CISO community. We've been doing defense in depth for all 30 years. It's a phrase that we use, I think, frequently in the community. The other thing I think that is going to be super helpful that I'm starting to see, just because I think the media is so involved in what CISOs and security companies are doing, is our ability to share with one another. These nation state actors, the advanced persistent threat that we see, we all are being attacked by the same entities. And one of the things that the CISO community hasn't been wildly great at is sharing threat intelligence and information together. So Alex, to your point, when we talk about if we can actually tell you what has happened, in many cases, we may not know. But what we do know is that there's signals and there's intelligence that point us in a certain direction. And our communities collectively have to decide that if we're going to fight this threat actor together, we have to share more information. And I think to your point, I think zero trust is one of the key tenets that's allowing us to share, because you have partnerships amongst us that say these are the tenets of zero trust that we as individual companies will implement. And then it goes back to the technologies that we're building our stacks upon. It includes FIDO and ensures WebAuthn. And so I think those are the things that are going to be helpful for zero trust moving forward. But it's also this collective lessons learning, this transparent sharing, because our customers are used to getting these security bulletins. They don't exactly understand what they mean, but what that means for us is that there is a level of transparency that's happening either on purpose or just forced. But I think it's going to help our industry move along a little bit faster.
Great. Thank you. Dev, you were nodding your head. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Jameeka's mentioning here.
Oh, I mean, all in agreement with everything everyone said. Zero trust to me, I mean, it's a very wide term. There's many things happening. I agree. We have been doing a lot of it for a long time. But branding's important. It's like, I love Häagen-Dazs, and that's because the name was chosen to make it sound really fancy. And so branding is important. If zero trust is how we get us to adopt better segmentation, better isolation, I think that's fantastic. I think really it's the basics. Like, I think I would say more than 30. Like, I think the original Multex paper on security was in 66 or 76 on segmentation, isolation. Those are the basics. We have to get better at that. And I think sort of the other thing I would call out is sort of the advantages of modern cloud native infrastructure. Additionally, when it comes to isolation, if you use an IaaS platform on the cloud like Azure or AWS, containers, VMs are native, easily available, quick to spin up. And so you can isolate any workload very quickly. I think if you use modern SaaS applications, I'm obviously biased working at Figma, but every SaaS application is isolated from every other SaaS application, right? Like there isn't this one, you take down this corner. Like I've seen companies getting compromised because the internal cafe menu application was on the same network as everything else. And that shouldn't be a thing, right? And so modern SaaS architectures, modern cloud native architectures really give you a huge advantage when it comes to this sort of isolation, and then lets your security team focus on other places where more work is needed for isolation. So really embracing a cloud native posture and how that can accelerate resilience and isolation is something that I'd also flag.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, I would love to, continue talking about zero trust here. Everyone loves zero trust. I would love to hear from Alex. I mean, just in terms of this term obviously is, maturing, and people are starting to really understand what it means. I've always found that it seems like it's such a powerful thing, but it is, it's difficult to kind of understand. There's lots of different components to it, which we've been talking about a bunch of the different ones here. But I mean, Alex, maybe what would be sort of your short definition of what zero trust is, and also what zero trust isn't?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think if we go back to the origins of the term, really what it comes from is a time when most networks were configured in sort of the M&M model, which is a crunchy exterior and a soft, chewy center, right? And this idea that you could somehow create a perimeter that, put up a VPN, it'll be fine. Everybody's one click away from system level malware, right? And so if you're browsing the web, the next thing you click on could put malware on your machine. And if you do that, your VPN is now compromised, right? And so, in the current world, I think what Zero Trust says is there's nothing about the network location that by itself tells you you're secure, that you have to have, I think of it as zero implicit trust, right? We want to be explicit about everything. We want to explicitly verify the device. We want to explicitly verify the user. We want to explicitly verify the location, right? Like that explicit verification thing is a huge part of it. The goal of Zero Trust, I think, is to say that we never allow access to a resource we care about, but that we explicitly verify the aspects of that request, and we push it through a least privilege access policy. In other words, we're thoughtful about saying, like Andrew was talking about, compartmentalizing those requests to say, hey, look, if you're a user that doesn't need access to that app, you don't have access to that app. If that's a location where that app shouldn't be accessed from, there's no access. If you shouldn't be accessing that app from your personal phone, let's say you're doing a wire transfer of $1 million for a bank, you don't need to be doing that from an unregistered iPhone, right? Like, I love iPhone, got one, but that's not the way to do it, right? So it's thinking through all these aspects. And then essentially playing that least privilege access policy. And then I think the third tenet, so if the first one is explicit verification, the second one is least privilege access. The third thing that's really important, and I sort of touched on it before, is assume breach. You're going to assume that the worst is going to happen anyway, that either that device or that network or that user or maybe some combination of them can be compromised. That's why we invest in security automation. We want to make sure that we're thinking about automatic detection, automatic response, trying to do containment as fast as possible. If you think about the old model, Andrew sort of inspired this, and so I'll go with it. Like the old model, like the way that ships are made, right? And you have essentially crash bulkheads, so that if you're holed in one compartment, you can shut that off, right? It's great if doing that is like, you think about the old movie where everybody's running around screaming and the guy grabs the handle and starts turning it, right? But wouldn't it be better if the door just closed, right? Like on its own, like, oh, look, we've got water, let's close that compartment. So like the automation part's really important. Zero Trust, I think, can get inflated to be, my favorite quote on Zero Trust, I asked a CISO, hey, what does Zero Trust mean to you? And he says, it means whatever the person on the other side of the table is trying to sell. And I think that it's important that we don't sort of say Zero Trust is like everything, right? I think it's the proactive side, largely the proactive, preventative side, setting up our policies, setting up our environment so that we have that containment, so that we have that explicit verification, and then really critically, not just sort of saying, well, I've got the device cert, therefore everything else must be fine, or I've got the user with MFA, everything else must be fine. That we want to explicitly verify everything, do least privilege access, and then be ready for the bad stuff to happen anyway.
Hey,
great.
Kyle, can I jump in? Because Illumio has clearly made a very big mission bet on Zero Trust from day one. When we entered market 7 years ago, we were talking about it. I think what Jameeka said is absolutely true, which is the term for cyber professionals has been around forever. And taking exactly what Alex said, it really does mean assume breach to all of us that do this for a living and participate in the ecosystem. But there's the other half of it, which is what it is not. And I think that, you know, to Alex's last point, there isn't a homepage of a cyber vendor on planet Earth right now that doesn't have the word zero trust on it. I promise you, not every one of those vendors is really a zero trust vendor. So if the notion is it's a strategy, it's an architecture, and it's a framework for how you run your cyber strategy and posture, then what it isn't is it isn't every single security control in your environment. And that's really important to acknowledge, is that you have controls like detection that are not really zero trust. They're not there to help you to work off of an assumed breach mindset. They're there actually to prevent the breach in the first place, hence the word detection. And it's okay that they're not zero trust, because you need that detection. And most of the time it's going to work and it's going to save you. The zero trust controls are there, exactly as Alex said, for when they miss. And they're there to help you deal with the reality that you're going to miss. It's going to happen again and again. And we want to try and mitigate the reaction. We want to try and automate the reaction. We want to try and prevent the catastrophe. And so I think that one of the things that we're seeing is it's such a buzz term now that it's just being painted across everything. Give it a little time and it will mature, and you'll end up with two buckets of security controls, the ones that help you to stay safe and the ones that are truly there to help you enable living with threat and with breach. And the zero trust controls are going to end up in that second bucket, and it'll get a lot easier for the customers and the CISOs to be able to say, I'm making these two investments and these are the things they're doing for me. We're just really early in the game right now, and there's a lot of confusion.
Great. Thank you so much for drawing those distinctions. And so, you know, I'd love to also just bring in, you know, the topic or opportunity with data and security. Obviously, it's been coming up, you know, in some of the conversation here, but I mean, it's a part of zero trust. You need a lot of data to do zero trust well. But it's also, you know, it's becoming a part of sort of all of security now. And I would love to hear, maybe go over to Devdatta, because this is what we were talking about the last time I spoke with him. It was just, you know, how are you with Figma using, you know, data in new ways to do things in security that you weren't able to do previously?
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe like just to you know, do that segue, I would also add that like one thing I also like to think about with zero trust is it makes trust adaptive. So zero implicit trust, and then based on what you're doing, we can determine, oh, is this okay to do, right? Like, are you patched enough to view the example I gave, to view the cafe menu? You know what, I don't really need to care. And I think that gives a lot of flexibility to the security teams, because if you're in a world where everything requires you to be completely patched up and correct, that's just like zero trust is hard to really truly deploy, and it's impractical if you're going to require fully patched, verified machines for everything. And so that adaptive trust model is also another key part. And so for adaptive trust, to understand what is the current posture, what are our current threats, data really comes in. It cannot be prescriptive. It has to be what has currently run, what is currently running. Is it some malware or all these verified executables? What has this user done in the past? Are they showing up from like an anomalous location? Have they typically been showing up from, let's say, San Francisco, and are now currently showing up from Paris, or suddenly showing up from London? And then maybe we can change our trust requirements and say, actually, you're showing up in a new location. Let's ask you to do an extra step of verification and stuff like that. And so I think data is really critical to be able to do the adaptive trust model that zero trust really requires. And that requires a large amount of data and a large amount of modern data processing capabilities, ETLs, data transforms, and all these things that are really common practice in sort of the product line that I think security also needs to start adapting and learning from. And so modern large-scale data warehouses let you slurp up this data. You know, if you can look at the logs of a particular user across your ID provider, across your EDR provider, across all these SaaS applications and your infrastructure provider that they're using, you can really make a thoughtful decision on whether someone's recent activity is suspicious and the recent activity that they're trying to do, which is the moment where you make a zero trust decision. Does that require extra verification? So I think data is really key to the future of sort of zero trust security. Obviously, segmentation, I think going back to some of the discussions we're having, segmentation is step one. But in the assume breach world, you also want to use data to make adaptive, just-in-time decisions.
Great, thank you. Jameeka, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I know that using data is really pivotal to a bunch of aspects of your job at Auth0. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, how you see it.
Yeah, I think Devdatta hit it like nail on the head. And when we think about some of the key tenets of the work that we do around visibility, we can't protect what we can't see. And observability, the automation, the act of really getting into the automation of automating our response and automating our detections, all of these things are reliant on data. Us understanding our risk posture, that's reliant on data. And it's not just reliant on data, it's reliant on clean data. And so we just released a state of secure identity report through Auth0 that focuses on helping our customers identify what the biggest risks are. And why are we able to do this? Because we have billions of logins. And so really making sure that we have good data and threat intelligence signals around what the consumers are seeing. And what's come out of that for us is like, hey, there's a few attacks that are really focused on the customer identity space versus the workforce identity space, and really taking that data and saying, hey, there's some big 3 attacks that are out there that we're seeing in our space. So MFA bypass, credential stuffing, and fraudulent registrations are what are coming out of our data. And so I think it's critically important. The other thing is when we talk about the risk posture, one of the things that we're doing is sharing data across our ecosystem. So for us on the Okta side of the house, on the workforce side of the data piece, we're looking at our web application firewalls, and we use a couple, Fastly Human, F5, Perimeter X. We're taking and ingesting intel signals from those. And that helps us to formulate a risk posture around our users, around our continuous authentication and authorization that happens. So you're seeing that being turned into again, the observability space that allows for adaptive MFA, for step-up authentication, for continuous authentication. And these are all going to drive, I think, us as a community into a space where we are able to be a bit more resilient because we are automating the process using this data that we're talking about.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that I think I wanted to jump in on with Andrew, and I don't think I'm not trying to correct him, to be clear. I think that we look at risk, there's the sort of the question or the detection. There's a question of like some things you detect after the fact. And that's an important thing to understand how to do your forensics and your eviction and all that kind of thing. But what Jameeka's talking about is super, super important too. Like when we look at things like nation state activity and understanding, what infrastructure a given nation state actor is using, like that threat intelligence can inform a policy decision. When we understand what your user's behavior pattern or what a group of users' behavior patterns are over time, that can inform a policy decision. So there's like 2 sides to this detection, right? Detection can be real time or can inform a real time decision. In that case, it's sort of on that prevention side, that zero trust, let's have a policy side. And then it can also be used in the forensic analysis later. A really good example of this where, like, just to give you a sense of how powerful this is, and I'd say, like, obviously I have a preferred vendor here, but I think that, the main thing here is that cloud intelligence at this point, like cloud awareness of threat intelligence and of user patterns is really important, in part because as vendors, we can see across tenants. And so a really powerful example of this is the low and slow attack password spray, which is the #1 cause of account compromise today. Again, MFA will block it, but lots of people not using MFA, right? So when we look at password spray, a given organization would simply see that one user got one password wrong. Like, oh, somebody had a typo. That's all you would see, right? When we look across all of our organizations, we can see that all of these users are getting the exact same password wrong, right? And that tells us, okay, we have a password spray attack. We have a single actor who has millions of names in a list, and they're trying password 1, 2, 3 against every name in that list, right? Well, so now we can say, okay, what's that attacker infrastructure look like? What IP addresses are they on? What agent are they using? And then we can go and turn that back into that real-time prevention, right? One of the things that I think is super hard to get our heads around is that, like, as SOC people, we want to look at the individual detection and sort of tear it apart and do a thing. But this sort of thing has to happen really fast. Or you just want to sort of say, look, my zero trust policy is if there's an anomaly level above X, I'm not going to let the user log in, or I'm going to challenge or whatever. Because the reason for that anomaly evolves by the day. And if you're in a position where you have to go back and say, well, wait, I'm going to inspect this particular detection and go see if that's and that, then you're going to be in a place where, just like VPN policies of yesterday, your policy was good when you set it up 25 years ago. The problem is that the world has moved on, and now your VPN is not holding anything back, right? And so the same thing's going to happen in the identity space. And I think this concept of, like, how do we look across multiple tenants? How do we use all of that traffic analysis, all that threat intelligence to give you a good answer, which is simple, which is, hey, if that session looks sketchy to you, let's put an MFA challenge in front of it, a real-time challenge, or block it, or whatever your policy wants to do. risk is really, really valuable insight into your zero trust policy, I think.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, I'd love to, you know, I'm going to open this question up to anyone, but I want to go back to what Rotem was discussing earlier. Just that it's, you know, a lot is being asked of customers with these things, and you know, I would just love to hear, you know, Alex. I mean, you've mentioned automation. You know, AI and ML are coming along for security. You know, obviously not, you know, going to solve everything, but you know, I would just love to hear, you know, what are the things that are genuinely making things easier for customers when it comes to some of these issues that we're talking about, you know, now. Is it AI, ML, or are there other things out there that, you know, are really helping customers to you know, do more with the scarce people that they have available? So anyone can take that if they want.
I'll dive in on it, and then I'll try to be quick. We started doing supervised machine learning for identity protection in 2014 for our consumer ecosystem. We protect, you know, billions of accounts a day using it. Importantly, like the situation where we use ML to determine the risk and the response, the compromise rate is about 1/50th of what enterprises that control their own policies are achieving, like in aggregate, right? And so that goes to the sort of this question of like, how many of you can hire or trivially hire good cyber professionals right now? There's a 715,000 job shortage right now in the United States, right? 715,000 open cyber jobs in the United States today. Like it's impossible. What if you were a law firm of 30 people or a dentist's office? Do you think you could get the cyber talent in your organization that you need? Right. So I think that the big movement here is, you know, you can think of this as the consumerization of identity security, right? Where we start to say, look, we're going to turn on MFA for you. We're going to block legacy auth for you. We're going to decide when you need a challenge, and giving people enough control to feel safe in that space. Right. But that, I think, is where we have to go. And ML plays a huge role in making the decision, essentially, because a false positive is friction, right? And a false negative is a hack. So, you know, you want to have really good detection using all that data that Jameeka was talking about. When we look at the best example of this that we have right now is something called security defaults. And since 2019, we've turned on essentially security controls for our customers, consumerizing effectively the security of organizations for all new organizations that came in. And by doing that, we have raised our Mfa utilization by 6%, which is actually huge considering we started off at like 1%. We're up to 26%. We have seen a tenfold reduction in compromise rates in organizations where we do that for them, and about 92% of organizations decide to stay with it. So I think that this approach where we're starting to take more, and this gets right back to the earlier comments, is like, if you just said like, hey, here's a bunch of bolts and some sheet metal, go build yourself a safe car, like that's not a reasonable expectation for customers. We need to like basically take care of a lot of it for them. And then yes, if you're that kind of person, I'm a auto guy, you want a wrench on your car and you want to tweak the policies, great, but we're going to start you off with a safe vehicle and you know, take care of you from there. So I think that's the future, is using ML and threat intelligence to create a safe operating environment for our customers and handling a lot more of the heavy lifting for them.
And Alex, I think you said something critical here, because oftentimes when we talk about identity, and I do believe that identity is the new perimeter, and COVID changed that for all of us, right? Whether we wanted it to be or not, our employees have moved, but our customers were already beyond our perimeter. And so I think there's a couple of things that make machine learning so critical and data so critical, to add on to what you said. Number one, you know, our workforce is essentially contained within a certain boundary, certain confines. There are administrators and security folks and all kinds of folks that are involved in setting policy around how our users access. The consumer identity space is the wild, wild west. And so when we think about machine learning and automation and intelligence, the consumer space is where we really have to do the work on behalf of the consumer. So when we think about simple things like adaptive MFA that we can turn on because we understand that there's something going on, attack protection that really supports a layered approach. And so when we think about that, that's something that can turn on and help us to understand IP throttling and brute force protection and breach passport protection. These are things that we can do on behalf of our customers and our consumers that allow us to leverage machine learning. The other thing is that when we think about our implementation of different types of technologies that help us understand password breaches, oftentimes those signals are moving in the background. We understand a password spray, but also credential stuffing, and we can actually actually make it so that our consumers don't see the password reset that's happening on their accounts. And so it's frictionless for them. They get a new version of a code and they log in again. It resets the account. And so when we think about how we can implement machine learning, there's a couple of key, I think, number one, we all quote the Verizon data breach report that tells us that MFA, stops 95% of the attacks. But the other, I think, important kind of critical thing here is that when we think about how we introduce machine learning is almost 80% effective against user attacks, and it has minimal impact on the user experience. And so in the consumer or the customer identity world, this is the work that we still have to do. And it's a different kind of job. I think even for me as a CISO, being a product facing CISO and seeing the consumer space and really recognizing that the signals that we get from the consumer space also can translate over into really great work and intelligence in the workforce space as well. So I'm really looking forward to, as we mature, I think Andrew had a good point. Zero Trust is not a mature theoretical implementation of anything. It's not mature yet. But as we continue to understand it, implement it, and work together across the space, I think Zero Trust is going to mature. And you're going to see all of these technologies that we've talked about on the call really start to work in favor of us implementing Zero Trust. The other thing that I want to add is that I think on top of us not being wholly mature yet, I think that there's still work that we can do around the data. And I'm going to keep coming back to data because I think there's some critical points around how we use our data to help us get to Zero Trust. And I think, Devdatta, you have a really great understanding of that work that needs to be done, but it's critical in machine learning. So as we go down the path, we look at the data, we do continuous authentication, we get threat intel signals, and this ultimately is what helps us get to Zero Trust. The other thing, to Devdatta's point, is that I believe that one of the things that SaaS providers offer is resiliency. It's really hard to move laterally from one SaaS provider to another, and that offers some resilience in the space. And so I think when we think about ransomware coming in and taking down our entire infrastructure, it's really hard to do if you're using multiple SaaS or cloud providers that are providing continuous authentication and authorization, which is Zero Trust, because then that lateral movement and that persistent access by a threat actor is difficult. So I think there's a lot to it. I could talk about it forever, but those are kind of some of my points.
Awesome.
I think probably, Kyle, to your question, which was, what has made, again, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, what has made things really significantly easier? I think first, the big providers, Apple, Google, I think them making WebAuthn biometrics easy to use has been a huge change. I mean, I don't know, 8 years ago, if you had told me everyone in the world would have their phones encrypted, I'd say you're out of your mind, right? Like, who's going to type in a code and everything? But look, like, everyone's using Touch ID, Face ID, and it's really working well. I think that has significantly changed the security posture of the average device. So I think that's been really huge. And then I would sort of second the SaaS apps. I think, ransomware, being able to delete all your data and it's gone forever, isn't really a concern if you're using modern SaaS apps, right? Like a OneDrive or a Dropbox or a G Drive that has continuously backing up your data. They have your backups for months, and so you do not have to. So a lot of these SaaS apps that are inherently compartmentalized and segmented and have strong security teams that are keeping the data safe and secure has been a huge win in terms of improving resiliency and compartmentalization, as we've talked about. So I think those two are the things that I think about have fundamentally improved things, and I'm excited for the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'd love to wrap up. I'd love to ask one last thing here to everybody. Devdatta, you mentioned, being optimistic. So I'm going to run with that. Maybe start with Andrew. But Andrew, I mean, what's something that you're optimistic about, in terms of securing businesses?
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to pull it up out of the technology for a minute to answer the question. I think there's two things. One is actually bringing it all the way back to where we started. I think we finally shifted our mindset to acknowledge we're going to live with these things. It's part of operating in a technology-driven world. And then security can actually embrace a breach, not as a reason to lose their job, but as something that they have to live with, help us to live with, help us to mitigate when it happens. That mental shift to me is actually optimistic, because I think we were deluding ourselves for a while there, assuming that we were going to detect and prevent everything forever. And so getting to a reality-based mindset allows us to then get to a reality-based strategy, and then we build the right stack to take into account the reality that we live with. And so I'm very optimistic about that. The other thing is, and I guess just to round it out, it's that I really do believe that we're at a place now where if we focus on the fundamentals, if we actually step back and say most of what's happening are based on basic hygiene, basic things that if we actually go back to some of the very, very simple fundamentals in hygiene and security, we can actually prevent a lot of the problems that effectively are self-created. I also see that mindset more and more. And I think the conversation around resilience is actually a very big piece of that. And so I just think we're in a better place to start the journey the right way. And I think that that's a reason for optimism. We got a lot of work to do, though. I don't want to in any way sound naive when I say that. But I do think that we've got our heads in a better space, and now we got to go do the work to prove it.
Great. Anyone else optimistic on the panel about anything? Jameeka, maybe.
I think Andrew hit the nail on the head. We're in a great place to start this phase of our journey. I think that we all recognize that the challenges are very similar, no matter what space you are in. It's very similar across for CISOs and for security professionals. What we're seeing is similar, and how we protect and defend against those are very similar. And I think that this collective agreement that this is work that we must do. So even with, again, with the buzzword of zero trust, it's no different than when as digital transformation rises up, there's a collective agreement amongst the CIO community that it must happen. I think for the CISO and security professional community, zero trust is our collective agreement that this is work that we must do across the space. And that's exciting because that means that we're all working towards a common goal. How we get to that goal will be different, but I think the thought leadership and innovation that's happening behind the scenes is going to be incredible to protecting our workforce and our consumers in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to say something incendiary, but it'll make sense once I talk about it. I'm optimistic about ransomware. At RSA this year, I had a bunch of meetings with CISOs that I've been begging to turn on MFA for a long time. And they're all like, hey, how do I turn on MFA? I was like, I've been asking you for 4 years. Why now? And the answer is, well, my board says I have to get my ransomware insurance rates down. Yeah. And I think that like what we're seeing is that the world is connecting the dots in terms of the importance of cybersecurity. And I think some of the comments that Andrew made were spot on about the practical nature of, Bruce Schneier called this 20 years ago. He's got a book called Secrets and Lies, where he basically said, look, all the crypto doesn't matter. What matters is, the way that we operate and the social contracts we have. And I think that what's happening now is we're starting to see enough connectedness of real systems, enough real financial impact, enough and really ransomware is the thing that shuts down a business. I think the concept of, well, I lost a few documents, I'm not sure what that really means to me, versus, wow, I can't serve my customers, right? Like it changed the game in some really important ways. And so I think that the conversation has expanded beyond our community of security professionals and now is involving the business in ways that they're engaged, and the board is telling us that we have to implement controls. And that's actually a really powerful, positive step forward. It's the beginning of a maturation in this space that I think results in a much safer environment at the end of the day.
Awesome. Devdatta, final quick optimistic note here.
I feel excited about modern cloud native technologies. I think, Alex mentioned this, Jameeka mentioned this, Andrew also, that you use a modern cloud SaaS app, you're relying on the security of that app security team, probably like their cloud provider, Microsoft or Amazon security team, their ID provider, Okta or Auth0 security team. Like there is just so many security teams implicitly or explicitly working together to create this agile environment that is really responding quickly to security incidents and alerts and keep you a lot more secure. So I'm excited about cloud native apps.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Such a great conversation. Thanks to all the panelists for joining and sharing all of these insights. Really appreciate it. And thanks to our sponsor and thanks to everyone who tuned in. Look forward to continuing the conversation and speaking again with everybody here. But yeah, that's it for now. But thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thanks
so much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.